Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode. Today, we're going to discuss how to take your minis from mini to not so mini. And there's a couple ways you can do that. I mean, obviously, you can always upsize anything. This is the base that was meant for. These are just some other bases that have been upscaled a little bit. So again, these are meant originally for 32 millimeter. Now they're probably large enough for, I'd say, about 118 scale at that size. So when you're looking to scale items up or down, obviously there's a few things you want to consider, and I'm going to go over those in the video with you as we look over this particular file here that I showed you as a demonstration, and it's also in the thumbnail. So no, it's not clickbait. I'm actually discussing the model that I'm showing you because why not? It makes sense, and it's something that I've already scaled. So anyway, without further ado, let's get right into it. All right, here we have the file. This is one of Crippled God Foundry's. This is a Shadow Blade. Originally starts out around this size. In fact, I think that is actually the default size. Yep, that's 100%. 39.6 millimeters tall. And it's a really detailed model at that size. Now, if you wanted to go one scale up, which is 124, this is about 100% larger, and it comes in about 79 millimeters tall, and that's about 124 scale. So if we double that again, and this one's already been hollowed and set up, so we don't see the percentage here, we're at about 127. This isn't even double, it's a little less than double, 127 millimeters, so 12.7 centimeters tall. This is roughly between, I'd say, 118, maybe 116 scale. But this is the size that I showed you in the clip and the size on the thumbnail of the video for the demonstration. So this one has been hollowed. It's got holes in it, and it's all hollowed out, but it's ready to be supported, as are the other ones. Now, if y'all are familiar with Crippled God Foundry, they do pre-supported files. So if you do have the small miniature size one, go ahead and use their pre-supports. They're usually spot on. Just check for islands and you'll be good. Now, when you're sizing it up to about this size, you don't really need to worry about hollowing, because at this size, and I'll show you exactly what will happen, it's not going to hollow very well. You're going to wind up with, see, gaps and no useful places to put any holes. So that's actually not going to work. And then if you take this down too much and you start thinning it, you're just going to wind up with a really weak model. See, that gives us some pass through, but then you still have this gap on the leg. You might be able to place some really tiny holes in here, but not worth it. Just keep a model that size solid. Just keep in mind when you're doing your support work, and this really isn't a supporting video as much as discussing like what to look out for when you're scaling. But just make sure that when you're doing your support work that you start out heavy, on the feet especially, because you want to be able to anchor this thing in. So, start out nice and heavy on the feet and perimeter of the feet, because those are going to be your starting points. In fact, I think I need to lift this thing. There we go. But yeah, go ahead and make sure that you're putting proper emphasis where the print is starting, especially on the feet. Especially if it's solid, it's going to be a little heavier than a mini, so you will need a little bit more supporting. Now, throughout, you're going to still need to be delicate with zones like the swords here and stuff like that, because those can still snap if you're using supports that are too heavy. Otherwise, you shouldn't have too much of a problem with this. It's not that big. It's not that thick. The surface area, the mass isn't super huge. And that's one of the things I was going to get to. So when you're looking to scale, whether you're scaling upwards or down, so whether I'm going from this to this or this to this, make sure you're not losing any quality. Because one of the things you will notice is at a certain scale, the polygons will eventually get no, they're not good enough. So, for example, I won't scale this one anymore, but let's say we scale this one. Let's fit this one to the size of the printer itself. There we go. 19 centimeters tall. We actually make it a little bit shorter. And you can see this would be very heavy. But still no real loss of quality. Well, I mean, slightly. You're starting to see some of the polygon edges there as these are getting this large. But that's pretty big. There you go. There's some more jagged edges there. But that's pretty big, though, for it to get to this size and finally going, okay, some of these edges are not looking that great. That's pretty good. Most models you'll find you can usually scale them up about 500% without losing too much. And that really all depends on how well they were made. The quality of the model initially has a lot to do with that. And so, that's something that it's hard to determine until you start playing around with it. And then you'll notice right away, like, oh, that looks terrible. So, again, just keep that in mind. Scaling can kind of deteriorate quality. And we'll even look at this one so you don't notice it as much. Even zoomed in, not quite as bad. When you start to get bigger, you start to notice it more. And even on the small ones, now this one's scaled up a bit, not as noticeable. And then if we go down to the smallest one, you can barely get close enough to even notice any polygon lines at all. So this would be really clean, especially if you printed it as a nice high resolution, nice high layer height, rather. Um, but yeah, so going back to the hollowed one, determination on whether to hollow, that's another question I get a lot of, is like, when do you hollow? So I said don't hollow on this one. But if you're going to go much bigger than that, like I'd say even 250% is okay. Let's see. When you start getting around, yeah, this is a little bit shorter than this one. This is 12 centimeters. This is 18, or sorry, 11. Um, I would probably start hollowing at this level. So I'm guessing maybe and again this depends on the object, because if she was a lot thicker in the middle, like if there was more surface area here and these legs were wider, or the foot was wider or something like that, then you'd have more material to start doing your hollowing work with. But the other thing you're also going to have to consider is hollowing. You're still going to have to block off certain areas. For example, if you go in here and you start hollowing this because you scaled it, so you're like, all right, I want to hollow this now. So if we take a look at this now, we have some room in the feet. We can definitely do that. That gap is pretty much, well, it's still kind of there, right there, but there's enough room for resin to pass through. So you're not going to wind up with too much of a suctioning problem there, although it is kind of weird that doesn't really go very well. If I recall, the legs on this one were kind of a sticking point as well. And again, you'd have to go a little bit thicker, or bigger rather, scale wise, in order to really get a good hollowing out of this particular model. So maybe even at this height, you might try and do it solid, but I could still see being able to do this hollow like that. And I don't think it's going to be too much of a problem, but definitely got to make sure you put all your holes where they need to be and stuff like that. Because if we take a look at the big one that I've got hollowed already, the holes come right in at the feet, and you can see there's still that little cliff there inside the leg. But obviously she printed, so it didn't cause too much of an issue. One of the things I did have to do, though, is I did have to block off the arms using the blocking system, which is on the hollowing tab over here, and you just create zones inside the model that cannot hollow out, and you wind up with the ability to have solid arms solid swords, but the body itself is all hollow. And that worked out pretty well. So again, things to look out for are scaling, deteriorating quality, how big you want to go before you hollow, and also that depends on surface area, mass, like the actual mass of the object. I will take a look at how much resin usage is going to be, as well, because that'll kind of determine how much mass they're going to be. So hollow, obviously, they're going to be less mass. There's going to be less pulling, so lighter support. Solid, it's going to be heavier, more mass, so you want to do heavier support. But where do you draw the line between super heavy or heavy and not losing too much quality? Well, again, that might take a couple tries because you're not always going to hit the nail on the head the first time. But I would say for something like this, you're going to want to use heavies on your base supports for sure. Anything on the feet, definitely make as heavy as you want because you're not going to care about damage down here on the feet. These are the feet. You can sand that straight off. The swords and hands right here, be gentle with because you could easily still break one of these blades or handles. And then the rest of it is just going to be placing enough supports in there that are not too heavy, but heavy enough and braced together to create a nice structure support that this will survive the whole way up. Because if you look at this, the cross section of it, actually, here, let me do away with the hollowing. There we go. If you do away with the cross section of it, isn't that bad. I mean, if we take a look at the surface area here that you're actually taking up, so the amount of supporting needed isn't that great, to be honest. You can get away with using medium to medium light. So when I say medium to medium light, we're talking about supports that are, my mediums range from these, 0.22, 1.22 diameter, and you can of course make this wider the taller the object gets. So for example, a support all the way up here, you may want to make a thicker bar so it doesn't have as many issues with weakness as it moves up. So you can create that a little bit thicker, but keep the tip the same. So you're not creating too much excess damage. But then pay attention to the size of the island because sometimes the larger islands just require a larger tip, and just be certain to clip those off instead of trying to pry them off or pull them. As tempting as it is sometimes to try to rip all the supports off. So yeah, that is something to you have to keep track of. So again, scaling, keep track of quality. Make sure you're not losing too much quality. When to hollow, definitely over about 11 centimeters or 110 millimeters, I think is about the range to hollow. Again, depending on surface area, mass, overall width, and how much suction it's going to have, and how well you can place the holes too. I think that's also important. So keep that in mind as well. Aside from that, the other real thing is just to make sure that you're going to, be able to print the object in one shot. Now, obviously, there's the fit to bed or fit to, the fit to option on Lychee. If we go here, go scale, we can say fit to bed, which is actually the best way to see if something is really going to fit your printer. To be honest, this is because, and you can then move it, you can adjust it a little bit if you want to, and even say, okay, take up a little bit more room now, and then you can try it again. So there we go. It'll either get bigger or smaller depending on the orientation. Of course, the better the orientation you give it, the bigger it's going to be able to scale up. But again, that's just a demonstration of how far you can go. And again, use it based on your printer. So load up your printer profile, load up the file, scale it up as large as you can go, and then my best suggestion is take at least 20% off of that. So if it's 49, we're gonna say maybe 469. And the reason I do that is because it brings the model a little bit in on all sides, including the top, giving you some room to push it up, put a raft on there, and add all your under supports, because otherwise it was sitting pretty much on the bottom and you were going to wind up knocking it into the top of your printer when you go to move it up. Because the fit to bed option will literally take up as much room as it thinks it can take up. And that's pretty much all I have on advice on scaling. Now, again, if you're, I'll go over it again. If you're, looking to scale something, number one, pay attention for quality deterioration the bigger the object gets. If you scale it up 200% and you start seeing a bunch of polygon lines, you're going to see those when you print it. So keep that in mind. It's gonna look worse, or you're gonna have to do a bunch of sanding. Two, make sure that you know when to hollow, when the best point of that is to hollowing. And three, just remember to use the proper type of supporting if you're not hollowing and you're going to do a solid body, especially if you're going to do a bigger body or a larger character, and you want to do it completely solid. Now, it's not impossible. You totally can, but you're going to need to remember to put some heavier supports down at the feet and the bottom areas of the print versus the top areas, which can be a little bit lighter, because as the print gets up there eventually, it's kind of supporting itself. So that's pretty much scaling in a nutshell. If you have any questions, comments, please leave them in the comment section below. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching, y'all. Hope your new year has been treating you well, and we'll see you all real soon.